Clear out, old-timer. You're making the patrons uncomfortable. That's what the supervisor barked at the elderly serviceman attempting to find a place to sit in the restaurant. Onlookers observed. Some chuckled discreetly behind their beverages. Nobody intervened except a single individual, an unfamiliar face who positioned himself between the veteran and the disrespect. No yelling, no intimidation, just a simple five-word declaration. This will end by dusk. And 60 minutes later, the avenue was lined with darkened government vehicles and a commanding officer nobody dared disregard. If you believe true reverence doesn't need volume, but rather stands firm when others remain seated, share respect below. The Patriot Cafe had been a cornerstone in Riverdale for more than 6 decades. For Thomas Grant, it represented a weekly custom spanning nearly 30 years. Each Sunday, he would arrive exactly at 9:30 a.m., select the third table from the entrance, request coffee with 2 sugars and a bacon sandwich, sliced diagonally, and leave a consistent gratuity that never changed by a single cent. The employees recognized him. The frequent customers acknowledged him. He was as much a part of the establishment as the vintage music player in the alcove. But ownership transfers as businesses evolve. The previous month, Westfield Dining Corporation had acquired the Patriot Cafe. The business promptly replaced most of the workforce and recruited a manager from outside Riverdale, a polished young executive named Marcus Phillips, who constantly discussed performance analytics and consumer segments. On this specific Sunday, Thomas approached the restaurant with his characteristic deliberate stride. His movement was more labored nowadays. His posture curved from time and lingering wounds acquired in dense forest combat 50 years earlier. The weathered military coat he donned had experienced better eras, as had the tattered footwear that scraped lightly with each step. But his vision remained sharp and vigilant, absorbing everything with the meticulous scrutiny of someone who once needed to identify concealed dangers and hidden adversaries. As he reached for the entrance handle, he spotted the fresh placard in the display window. Patriot Cafe under new leadership, where every dish celebrates liberty. Thomas smiled faintly at the tagline. He comprehended something about freedom's price that marketing specialists never would. The chime above the entrance jingled as Thomas entered. The recognizable aroma of coffee and sizzling meat greeted him. But another element was different. The individuals behind the counter were all unfamiliar. And standing near the register was Marcus Phillips, examining Thomas with immediate distaste. "May I assist you?" Marcus inquired, his inflection suggesting he'd prefer otherwise. "Just proceeding to my regular position," Thomas answered, moving toward the third table. Marcus intercepted his path. "We're currently at capacity." Thomas surveyed the half-vacant restaurant in bewilderment. "I'm willing to wait," he proposed. "Listen," Marcus stated, lowering his volume, though not sufficiently to prevent nearby diners from hearing. "We're attempting to establish a particular ambiance here, a certain clientele." Thomas didn't immediately comprehend. "I've been visiting every Sunday for—" "Clear out, old-timer. You're making the patrons uncomfortable," Marcus interrupted, gesturing toward the exit. The establishment fell awkwardly silent. Several customers stared intently at their meals. A few younger patrons snickered behind their beverages. Nobody intervened. Thomas's complexion reddened with humiliation and uncertainty. His generation had been instructed to handle indignities with silent dignity. He began rotating toward the door, his palm quivering slightly on his walking aid. That's when a chair scraped audibly against the floor in the corner table. Michael Collins had been monitoring the exchange from the moment the elderly veteran entered. At 46, Michael possessed the measured composure of someone accustomed to observing before acting. His navy Henley and denim were unremarkable, but his gaze, alert, evaluative, missing nothing, belonged to someone who had spent years in environments where details determined survival. Without speaking, Michael rose from his table and traversed the restaurant with unhurried confidence. The other patrons watched, coffee cups suspended mid-air, as he positioned himself between Marcus and Thomas. "Is there an issue here?" Michael inquired, his tone calm but carrying an unmistakable gravity. Marcus straightened his designer neckwear. No issue, just explaining our seating protocol to— I heard everything you said, Michael interjected. Every single word. He turned to Thomas, his demeanor shifting instantly to respectful attention. Sir, I believe a table is available. Would you join me for coffee? Thomas hesitated, unaccustomed to intervention on his behalf. I don't wish to create problems. No problems whatsoever, Michael assured him, then added with deliberate volume, it would be my privilege. Completely disregarding Marcus now, Michael guided Thomas to his corner table, offering a steadying hand that the older man accepted after brief consideration. As they settled into the seats, Michael signaled to a young waitress who had been watching the scene with obvious discomfort. 2 coffees, please, he requested, loud enough for the entire establishment to hear. And whatever my friend typically orders, a bacon sandwich, sliced diagonally. Thomas supplied, some vibrancy returning to his face. The waitress nodded quickly, relief evident in her expression at having a clear direction. Marcus Phillips wasn't finished. He approached their table, customer service smile firmly affixed, but eyes cold. Sir, as the manager, I have the authority to— Michael silenced him with a look that made the younger man step back involuntarily. This will end by dusk. The straightforward declaration, delivered without anger or elevated volume, seemed to linger in the atmosphere. Several nearby customers shifted uncomfortably. Marcus regained his composure with a dismissive laugh. What, you're going to post a negative review online? Michael didn't respond to the mockery. He simply smiled, a slight knowing curve of the lips that contained neither humor nor threat, just absolute certainty. Then he redirected his attention back to Thomas as if Marcus no longer existed. Korea or Vietnam? Michael asked conversationally. Vietnam, 1st Marines, 68 to 70, Thomas replied. Military experience? Yes, sir. Different era, different locations. Marcus lingered momentarily, then retreated to the counter, muttering about troublemakers and regulation enforcement. For the next 40 minutes, Michael and Thomas conversed easily about fishing locations along the county waterway, the upcoming autumn weather, and whether the local high school football team had any chance this season. Nothing significant, nothing intimate, just a comfortable dialogue between 2 men who understood something unspoken about each other. When the bill arrived, Michael covered both meals despite Thomas's polite objection. As he placed cash on the table, he glanced at his timepiece, then out the window. Gorgeous day, he commented. Thomas nodded. Finest we've had all week. But while they conversed, something else was occurring. Unnoticed by anyone in the restaurant, Michael had transmitted a text message when he first stood up. Just 3 words and a location. The message had gone to someone who owed Thomas Grant a debt that could never truly be settled. A debt extending back decades to a storm-drenched night in dense vegetation, where helicopter blades sliced the air, and a young Marine refused to abandon anyone. Outside the restaurant on the tranquil Sunday street of Riverdale, the first black SUV rounded the corner, then another and another. Within minutes, the entire block was lined with government vehicles, their tinted windows revealing nothing of the occupants within. Pedestrians stopped to observe. Vehicles slowed as they passed. Something unprecedented was happening at the Patriot Cafe, something entirely unexpected in the small town's recent history. Inside, Michael Collins checked his timepiece again. Should be about now, he said quietly. Thomas looked at him with confusion. Time for what? The bell above the restaurant door jingled again. When nobody else rises, sometimes one voice or even just one gesture can transform everything. Comment, I stand with them because silent bravery still shakes foundations. The individual who entered wore the uniform of a 4-star general in the United States Marine Corps. His chest displayed rows of ribbons and medals that chronicled stories of decades of service across multiple continents. His bearing was flawless, his presence commanding without a single word being uttered. Behind him came 2 assistants in immaculate uniforms, their demeanor equally formal. The restaurant fell utterly silent. Even the sizzle from the cooking surface seemed to diminish in deference. General James Whitaker paused just inside the doorway, his eyes scanning the room with practiced efficiency until they found Thomas Grant. Recognition and something deeper. Respect mingled with old sorrow flickered across his face. Without acknowledging anyone else, he walked directly to Thomas's table. Thomas, astonished by the appearance of a four-star general in formal attire, attempted to stand. "Please, sir, remain seated," General Whitaker said, his voice gentle but carrying the unquestionable authority of command. Then, to the amazement of everyone watching, the general executed a perfect formal salute to the elderly man in the worn jacket. "Staff Sergeant Thomas Grant," he said. "It's been far too long." Thomas returned the salute with trembling precision. "General, this is unexpected. A mutual acquaintance indicated I might locate you here," Whitaker replied with the briefest glance toward Michael, who remained quietly seated. "Mentioned there might be a circumstance requiring clarification." By now, Marcus Phillips had emerged from the back office, alerted by the unprecedented silence in his establishment. His face blanched at the sight of a four-star general standing at attention before the very man he had attempted to remove less than an hour ago. What's occurring?" he stammered. General Whitaker turned, his expression hardening as he addressed not just Marcus, but the entire restaurant. "What's occurring is that I'm honoring the man who preserved my life and the lives of 14 other Marines on April 12, 1969, near the Cambodian border." His voice, though not elevated, filled the establishment completely. "This man trained the units that brought us home when we couldn't walk on our own. He deserves more than coffee. He deserves a nation's gratitude." A murmur rippled through the restaurant. Several patrons sat straighter in their seats. One older gentleman in the far corner stood up, revealed himself to be a veteran too, by his posture. Marcus moved forward, perspiration forming on his forehead. "Sir, we didn't realize who he was. You never asked," the general interrupted, each word precise as a surgical instrument. "You observed an elderly man in worn attire and made assumptions. That's not merely poor business, it's poor citizenship." The manager seemed to diminish visibly under the general's gaze. "I apologize, sir. I genuinely had no idea." "Your apology belongs to Staff Sergeant Grant, not to me." Outside, more vehicles had arrived. Word spread rapidly through the small town. Something extraordinary was happening at the Patriot Cafe. Curious onlookers gathered on the sidewalk. Among the black SUVs, a media vehicle from the nearest city's news station had now appeared. Inside, the atmosphere had transformed completely. Customers who had silently witnessed Thomas's humiliation now stood, some offering awkward apologies, others simply nodding respectfully. The young waitress who had served them brought fresh coffee, refusing payment. "My grandfather served in Vietnam," she said softly to Thomas. "He never discusses it, but thank you, sir." Thomas, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal, simply nodded. General Whitaker pulled a chair to the table and sat down. "Staff Sergeant Grant led a recovery operation after our helicopter was downed in hostile territory," he explained to the now attentive restaurant. "He had metal fragments in his own leg, but carried an injured communications specialist for 3 miles through enemy fire. When we encountered an ambush, he coordinated a defense that held until evacuation arrived." Thomas shook his head slightly. "Just performed what needed doing, sir." "Like anyone would." "Not like anyone would," the general corrected gently. "Like you did." As the general continued speaking, recounting for the captivated audience the details of Thomas's service, Michael Collins quietly slipped from his seat. Moving unobtrusively through the kitchen, he exited through the rear door of the restaurant. His purpose was fulfilled. The appropriate individuals were now paying attention. The right narratives were being shared. Michael had never sought recognition for himself. His own service record, classified operations across 3 continents, remained known to only a handful of individuals with proper clearance. He preferred it that way. What mattered wasn't who intervened, but that someone did. Sometimes, he reflected, justice needed only a gentle nudge to find its proper course. The events at the Patriot Cafe that Sunday morning transformed more than just a meal service. They changed the spirit of a community. Within a week, Westfield Dining Corporation issued a formal apology and announced new corporate training on respecting veterans. Marcus Phillips was reassigned to corporate headquarters, a lateral transition that everyone understood as the subtle demotion it was. The new manager, notably, was a retired Army sergeant with a talent for hospitality. But the most visible change appeared 2 weeks later, a bronze plaque mounted above the third table from the door. Its simple inscription read, "Reserved for those who shouldered the burden of freedom." Beneath it hung a framed photograph of Thomas Grant in his Marine dress uniform, young and erect, eyes already carrying the wisdom that comes from witnessing too much too soon. Every Sunday, that table remained reserved for Thomas, who returned to find himself welcomed with an attentiveness that sometimes still embarrassed him. Occasionally, other veterans joined him, sharing quiet conversations that needed no explanation or elaboration. Some traumas and some victories can only be understood by those who've walked similar paths. The restaurant instituted a new tradition on Veterans Day. All meals were provided without charge, not as charity, but as acknowledgement. The gesture spread to other businesses in town. The hardware store offered discounts. The movie theater reserved special seating. Small kindnesses multiplied not with fanfare, but with genuine appreciation. Perhaps most tellingly, a second place at Thomas's table was always kept vacant, reserved for the stranger who stood up. Though Michael Collins never returned to the Patriot Cafe, his absent presence remained a powerful reminder that courage often emerges from unexpected sources. Thomas's quiet smile grew warmer as the months passed. When asked about that Sunday morning, he would shrug and say simply, "Reminded me that decent people still outnumber the rest." He never discussed his own actions in Vietnam, preferring to redirect any praise toward others who had served. What none of the townspeople ever discovered was the connection between Thomas Grant and Michael Collins. They never learned that Michael's father had been the communications specialist Thomas carried through the jungle, that the general's annual holiday correspondence to the Collins family always included the phrase, "I haven't forgotten what we owe him," that Michael had grown up hearing the story of the Marine who refused to abandon anyone. Some debts can never be completely repaid. Some acts of courage create ripples that continue for generations. But in a small-town restaurant, one simple principle had been reaffirmed. Respect isn't granted based on appearance or circumstance. It's earned through actions. Sometimes visible, sometimes hidden in classified documents, in fading recollections. And sometimes one person taking a stand changes everything. If you believe true leadership shows itself not through volume, but through principled action, please subscribe to our channel for more stories that honor quiet courage.